poco, ahora. Ahora no, papi, después. Ahora no. Más tarde, mi amor. Más tarde, mi chiquito. Más tarde, mi amorcito.
Hello, I'm Matt Lewis,
And I'm Dr. Eleanor Yadiga.
and we're just popping up here to tell you some insider info.
If you would like to listen to Gone Medieval ad-free and get early access and bonus episodes, sign up to History Hit.
With the History Hit subscription, you can also watch hundreds of hours of original documentaries,
Such as my new series on everyone's favorite conquerors, the Normans.
or my recent exploration of the castles that made Britain.
There's a new release to enjoy every week.
Sign up now by visiting historyhit.com/subscribe, or find the link in the show notes for this episode.
Hello, I'm Dr. Eleanor Yadiga, and welcome to Gone Medieval from History Hit, the podcast that delves into the greatest millennium in human history. We uncover the greatest mysteries, the gobsmacking details, and the latest groundbreaking research from the Vikings to the Normans, from kings to popes, to the Crusades. We delve into the rebellions, plots, and murders that tell us who we really were, and how we got here.
Quilombo.
In the harsh, unforgiving world of Viking Age Scandinavia, blood ties are sacred, and family loyalty is paramount. Yet even these bonds can be shattered by jealousy and ambition. One such fateful confrontation is between the sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, the youngest, Ivar the Boneless, and Sigurd Snake in the Eye. The great hall of Kagak is buzzing with tension. Ragnar's sons have gathered to discuss their future plans, the firelight casting long shadows across their faces.
Sí se ve.
The eldest sibling, Bjorn Ironside, speaks of raiding the Mediterranean, his eyes gleaming with the promise of exotic treasures. But it is Ivar, the youngest and most ruthless, who commands attention. His mind sharp as a blade, Ivar proposes continued raids on England. His voice carries the weight of ambition. As he speaks, his piercing gaze sweeps across his brothers, challenging any who will dare oppose him. While Ivar is all cold calculation, Sigurd Snake in the Eye burns with a fierce pride. He has long resented Ivar's growing influence, the way their mother Aslum has doted on her youngest son. Sigurd's voice cuts through the silence like a knife. And what would you know of raiding, brother? He sneers. Ivar's face darkens. His hands grip the arms of his chair until his knuckles turn white. But Sigurd, emboldened by the tension, provokes him further. You speak of ambition, Ivar, but what do you truly know of the world? Of battle? Of being a man? Ivar's eyes flash, but Sigurd is heedless to the unspoken warning. Years of resentment pour out of Sigurd like poison from a wound. You think yourself so clever, so worthy of rule. But you forget, brother, you are not the only son of Ragnar, and you are certainly not the most loved. In a flash, Ivar's hand closes around the hilt of his axe. Those nearest to him flinch back, but Sigurd stands his ground, a mocking smile playing on his lips. What's the matter, Ivar? Did I strike a nerve? Or perhaps you're just realizing that our dear mother is no longer here to coddle you. Suddenly, with his face contorted with fury, Ivar hurls his axe across the hall with inhuman strength. Sigurd barely has time to register the glint of steel before the axe buries itself in his chest. The hall erupts into chaos. Other brothers rush to Sigurd's side as he collapses. As for Ivar, he remains in his seat, his expression unreadable as he watches the life drain from his brother's eyes. In the stunned silence that follows, all eyes turn to Ivar. There's no remorse in his gaze, no hint of regret for the blood on his hands. Instead, a cold smile plays at the corners of his mouth. The smile of a man who has just removed an obstacle from his path. With a gentleness that belies his earlier violence, he crosses the room and reaches out to close his brother's eyes. You should have learned to hold your tongue, brother, he murmurs. Now you will never know the greatness I am destined to achieve. For the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, an already fragile trust is shattered. Fraternal bonds once thought unbreakable lay in ruins alongside Sigurd's lifeless body. Ivar the Boneless has taken his first steps towards the infamous legacy that will one day be his. In the sagas and stories that will pass down through generations, the killing of Sigurd by Ivar will be remembered as the clash of two brothers, two alike in pride, two different in ambition. It's a reminder that even in the world of heroes, the greatest threats often come not from without, but from within. And as for Ivar the Boneless, his path is set. With power within his grasp, he will go on to carve his name into history as a figure of terror and awe. This is, I am sure you can agree, an incredible story, and one we have been telling about Ivar the Boneless for centuries. But does this fantastic myth align with what we actually know about the historical person himself, or the Viking practice more generally? In this episode of On Medieval, I'm joined by Claire Downham, Professor of Medieval History at the University of Liverpool. Together, we will get to grips with one of the most enigmatic and formidable figures of the Viking Age, Ivar the Boneless, a leader of the great heathen army, founder of the Uigi-Mawr dynasty, whose life shaped the political and cultural landscapes of England, Ireland, and beyond. Claire, welcome to Gone Medieval.
Nice to meet you, Eleanor.
I brought you here today to talk about one of those household names of Viking history, Ivar the Boneless. And I think that when you want to talk about Ivar the Boneless, we first kind of have to think about his early life and his relationship with his brothers and fathers, because that's where this story usually begins.
Right, so this is one of the things where Ivar the Boneless has become very much a figure of legend. So what we think we know about his ancestry and siblings is really first attested centuries after he died. And I think this is often the way with medieval dynasties. Like, Ivar was clearly a very important leader. So we have contemporary evidence of his activities in England and in Ireland, and at his death in 873, he's recorded as king of all the Vikings in Britain and Ireland. Clearly achieved a lot in his own lifetime. But it's really only after a few generations that people realise, oh, there's this thing called a dynasty of Ivar that's really important. Now we have to make up a story of who Ivar was to justify the greatness of this dynasty. So we find them kind of mining back and linking him to other stories. And I kind of like it in a way. There's this almost like this kind of cloud of figures that crops up in sagas, and it's kind of I don't know, like a soap opera or a series of kind of superhero movies where different characters come in and they link to other movies, and sometimes they have a walk-on part and then they crop up somewhere else, and it's sort of part of this story world. So it's actually very hard to say if any historical accuracy about Ivar's family. So the idea that he's the son of Ragnar Lothbrok, and I know you've already had a podcast on Ragnar, which hopefully people have listened to. Ivar's link with Ragnar is really only first aired in the late 11th century. So this is Adam of Bremen, who calls him a son of Lothbrok. So, it's almost like the elements of the story are still being worked out then, and it grows with the retelling. And I think it is because people love a good story, but it's also the role of stories to explain how could Ivar's dynasty be so great if they didn't have a really brilliant story at the start of it all. And so they're kind of feeding that human need to have that story. So, all the sort of elements of the Ragnar Lothbrok and Ivar and his son story are quite familiar. The idea that sort of Ragnar was thrown into a pit of snakes by Ella, king of Northumbria, and then his sons, including Ivar, come for revenge, and Ella is captured, and then there's supposed to be this blood eagle ritual. I mean, it's all great storytelling. Did it happen? Well, we know that there was an Ella of Northumbria. We know that there was an Ivar. Do we really know there was a Ragnar Lothbrok when the sources that first attest to that existence are quite late? And do we know that Ivar was their son? And was there a blood eagle ritualing? Was there a pit of snakes in York in the late 9th century?
Every time for me, it's the pit of snakes. I'm like, what snakes, babe? We don't.
We don't have many, yeah.
We do not. The island of Britain is kind of like the poisonous snakes are kind of scant on the ground. I don't know, like, where are we sending away to Africa for these snakes? Possibly, but it just seems like a lot of trouble to go through to execute one's enemies when you could just cut their heads off, for example.
It's a lot of trouble, isn't it? Like, who's going to feed the snakes before and afterwards? What do you do with the snakes? Nobody really thought this through properly.
There are logistics. There are snake-based logistics.
Snake maintenance is not a simple task, so...
Exactly. I mean, now, to be fair, it is a hell of a story, though.
Yes.
And we do have to give them that one. And I suppose that this is one of these, quite interesting things, because medieval people love to do this, and especially, as you say, kind of getting into the high medieval period around the 11th century, you get this great amount of myth-making that starts getting involved. Everyone, the Brits are descended from Aeneas, and the Merovingians were descended from a sea monster, and, bloody hell, the Czech royal family is descended from a fairy. Everyone's got a really good story about how these things came about, and that's really important. Now, whether or not people actually believed it at the time, I'm not sure that they did, but I think that they believed it was important to have a story, and, that's a sort of a different thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if we look at quite a lot of content on media, TV nowadays, like historical drama, and yet we know that this isn't actually a rigid factual account of what happened. But, the past has always been a playground for people's imagination, and I think people love stories where it does mix myth and fact. It kind of gives an imaginary life to these real events, and I think that's actually quite a good thing. Sometimes as a historian, your job is that job of coming in and saying, no, it didn't really happen like that, which kind of fun, you're playing people's fun, but obviously storytelling and adherence to historical facts can pull in different directions sometimes.
We're here for the story. We're committed to the bit, I think, and that's absolutely fine. And it's okay to say this is myth-making, and that's as important as whether or not it actually happened. Because, it did happen. It's telling the story, right?
Myth can sometimes be more powerful than historical fact in determining people's actions as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then we have this great... enigma surrounding the name itself, because you know, how does one come up with the name like the Boneless? Because this isn't, you know, one of the great Viking names that we, you know, like Blood Axe or something like that. You know, you get these more hyper masculine names elsewhere, but here we get the Boneless. What's going on?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, as you say, you know, Eric Bloodaxe is such a vivid name, and as you say, you know, evokes masculinity and you know, prowess and everything. Whereas boneless, you know, does it spineless? Does it mean impotent? You know, so various theories have like been circulated as to what it means and where it comes from, because it doesn't really sound like the kind of epithet you'd give somebody to flatter them. You know, we say Trump the Boneless, for example, it just wouldn't sound as good as, you know, Trump the Bloody X or something.
But originally we get a lot of the records regarding this from the Latin, right? And so we're kind of translating from there, no?
Yes, so there's this possibility that one of the epithets that may have been linked to evil in early Latin texts is exosus, which means odious or evil. I mean, when we do have Latin accounts of evil, he is renowned for his cruelty. And so exosus, if you didn't know Latin very well, you might go, oh, this is an unfamiliar word, and you go ex, it means from or out of, and osus is like the word for bone. So it could mean boneless, and then obviously maybe people's imagination started to run away with themselves. Oh, what does boneless mean? And then it's